The bullet grazed her cheek before she even heard the shot. And Zelda Newton knew in that moment she should have felt something, fear or anger or the will to survive. But there was only emptiness where those instincts used to live. The year was 1878, and San Jose, California, had grown from a small pueblo into a bustling town of nearly 13,000 souls, though Zelda wondered if she still counted among them, or if she had become something less than human in the months since her father's death. The ranch he had built with his own hands now belonged to Marcus Thornton, the banker who had called in loans her father never could have repaid, and the home where she had learned to ride before she could properly walk was occupied by strangers who looked at her with pity when she passed by on the dusty streets. She pressed her hand to her face and felt the warm trickle of blood, but she did not run from the second shot that split the air. The men who fired at her were Thornton's hired guns, sent to discourage her from making trouble about the fraudulent documents that had transferred ownership of Newton land into Thornton's grasping fingers. Zelda had threatened to take her case to the territorial courts, had shouted it in the middle of the San Jose streets where everyone could hear, and now these men meant to silence her permanently. "Seems like you got a death wish, lady," one of them called out, his voice carrying across the empty lot behind the mercantile where she had been cutting through to reach her boarding house. Zelda straightened her spine and stared at them with hollow eyes. "Then grant it," she said quietly. "There is nothing left worth fighting for." The words tasted like ash in her mouth because they were true. Her father was dead. Her childhood home was gone. Her mother had died bringing her into this world 22 years ago, and now Zelda stood alone in a town that had watched injustice unfold and done nothing to stop it. The men raised their revolvers again, and she closed her eyes. The thunder of hooves shook the ground beneath her feet. Zelda's eyes snapped open to see a rider bearing down on the gunmen at a full gallop, his horse kicking up clouds of California dust that glowed golden in the late afternoon sun. The rider was low in the saddle, moving as one with his mount, and he had a rifle in his hands that he fired with precision that sent both men diving for cover. "Get down," he shouted at her, but Zelda remained standing, watching this stranger risk his life for reasons she could not fathom. He wheeled his horse around her like a shield, firing twice more to keep the gunmen pinned behind a water trough. "Lady, I said get down." His hand shot out and grabbed her arm, hauling her up behind him on the horse with strength that left no room for argument. Zelda found herself pressed against his back as the horse surged forward, racing down the narrow alley between buildings while bullets whined past them. She wrapped her arms around his waist by instinct, feeling the solid warmth of him through his worn shirt, and something flickered in the dead place inside her chest. They rode hard through San Jose's outskirts, past the orchards that gave the valley its wealth and the farms where Chinese workers tended vegetables in neat rows. The stranger did not slow until they reached a small ranch tucked against the foothills, a modest spread with a well-maintained barn and a house that looked lived in but not prosperous. He dismounted in one fluid motion and reached up to help her down, his hand steady on her waist. "You are bleeding," he said, his voice quieter now without the chaos of gunfire. Zelda touched her cheek again and looked at the blood on her fingers with detachment. "It does not matter." "It matters," he said firmly, and there was something in his eyes, a fierce conviction that startled her. They were blue like the California sky in winter, clear and bright in a face weathered by sun and wind. He looked to be perhaps 26 or 27, tall and lean with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with stubble. "Come inside. Let me tend that wound." "Why?" The question escaped her before she could stop it. "Why did you help me?" He met her gaze steadily. Because those men were about to murder you in cold blood, and I have seen enough killing to last several lifetimes." His name was Everett Sutton, and he told her his story while he cleaned the graze on her cheek with gentle hands in the simple kitchen of his ranch house. He had been a cavalry scout during the conflicts with various Apache bands in Arizona Territory, had seen things that haunted him still, and had come to California seeking peace and a chance to build something instead of destroy. He had bought this small ranch 2 years ago with his savings and worked it alone, running a modest herd of cattle and breaking horses for the surrounding farms. "I was in town collecting payment for a mare I sold," Everett explained, dabbing antiseptic on her wound that made her wince. "Sorry. I heard you shouting at that banker yesterday, telling him you would expose his theft. Half the town heard it." "Then half the town knows what he is," Zelda said bitterly. "Yet no one has lifted a finger to help me. People are afraid of men like Thornton. He owns the bank, which means he owns their livelihoods." Everett's jaw tightened. "But being afraid is no excuse for letting evil prosper." Zelda studied him in the fading light coming through the kitchen window. "You sound like my father. He believed in justice and doing right, and it got him killed." "How did he die?" The words came haltingly at first, then in a flood she could not contain. She told him about her father's ranch, 3,000 acres of prime land with good water and rich grazing. She told him about the drought 2 years ago that had killed half the herd, about the loans her father had taken to rebuild, about how Thornton had presented documents showing far larger debts than her father had ever signed for. She told him about her father's heart giving out the day the sheriff came to evict them, how he had collapsed in the yard he had walked every morning for 30 years. "I have nothing left," Zelda said when the words finally ran dry. "I work at the hotel cleaning rooms, and I live in a boarding house that smells like boiled cabbage and despair. I have no family, no home, no future. So when you ask why I did not run from those men, the answer is simple. There is nothing left worth fighting for." Everett was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. Then he said quietly, "You are worth fighting for." The words hit her like a physical blow. Zelda shook her head. "You do not know me. I know you stood up to a corrupt man in front of the whole town, knowing it would make you a target. I know you faced down armed men without flinching. I know you have been beaten down by loss and injustice, and you are still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling enough to grieve." His hand, rough with calluses, gently touched her uninjured cheek. "That takes more strength than you realize." Tears burned behind Zelda's eyes for the first time since her father's funeral. "I do not feel strong. I feel empty. Then let me help you feel something again." Everett's voice was soft but certain. "Stay here tonight. It is not safe for you in town, not with Thornton's men hunting you. Tomorrow we will figure out how to prove his fraud and get your ranch back." "Why would you do this for me?" Zelda whispered. "You could get yourself killed." Everett smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and alive. "Because some things are worth the risk, and something tells me you are one of them." That night, Zelda lay in Everett's spare room and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of his ranch. An owl called from the barn. Cattle lowed softly in the distance. The house creaked and settled around her. And for the first time in months, she felt the smallest spark of something that might have been hope. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Zelda found Everett in the kitchen, cooking breakfast with the easy competence of a man accustomed to caring for himself. He looked up when she entered, and his face brightened in a way that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "How is your cheek?" he asked. "Sore, but I will survive." Zelda accepted the cup of coffee he poured her, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "I have been thinking about what you said, about proving Thornton's fraud. And my father kept meticulous records. Every transaction, every loan, every payment, all documented in his ledgers. When Thornton took the ranch, his men went through the house and took anything they thought valuable, but they left my father's papers, said they were worthless. A grim smile touched her lips. Those ledgers are in a trunk at the boarding house. They prove the documents Thornton presented were falsified. Everett set down his spatula, his full attention on her now. Then we need to get them and take them to someone with the authority to act. Not the sheriff, he is in Thornton's pocket. But there is a territorial judge who rides this circuit, Judge Harrington. He has a reputation for being honest and unbending. He is due in San Jose in 3 days. Thornton will not let me live that long, not now that I have made myself such a visible threat. Zelda's hands tightened on her coffee cup. His men will be watching the boarding house. Then we will have to be clever about retrieving those ledgers. Everett's eyes gleamed with the light of a man who had planned raids and ambushes in his military days. Tell me about the layout of the boarding house. Where is your room? How many exits? What time does the landlady lock the doors? They spent the morning making plans, and Zelda found herself drawn into Everett's quiet confidence. He did not dismiss her ideas or try to protect her by excluding her from the risks. Instead, he treated her as an equal partner, weighing her suggestions seriously and building a strategy that played to both their strengths. She had not realized how much she missed being valued, being heard, being seen as something more than an object of pity. When the sun climbed toward noon, Everett saddled 2 horses and they rode toward San Jose, taking a circuitous route that kept them off the main roads. The valley spread around them in shades of gold and green, the coastal mountains rising purple in the distance. Wildflowers still bloomed in sheltered spots despite the advancing autumn, and the air smelled of dry grass and dust and possibility. "You ride well," Everett observed, watching how she sat her horse with easy confidence. "My father taught me when I was 5. He said a woman in the West needed to ride as well as any man because horses do not care about your gender, only whether you know how to treat them right." The memory brought a bittersweet smile. "We used to ride the boundaries of the ranch together every week, just the 2 of us. He would point out where the land changed, where the best grass grew, where the springs ran clearest. He wanted me to know every inch of it so I could care for it when he was gone. He was preparing you to inherit. Yes, though I was too young to realize it at the time. He knew his heart was weak. The doctor had warned him years ago." Zelda's throat tightened. "But I was not prepared for how quickly it would happen, or how helpless I would be against men like Thornton." Everett was quiet for a moment, then said, "My father was a farmer in Missouri, worked land that barely yielded enough to feed us. He wanted more for me, saved every penny to buy me a good horse and a rifle when I turned 16, said I could go west and make something of myself." He paused, his gaze distant. "He died of pneumonia that same winter. I left in the spring and never went back. Do you regret it?" "I regret that he never saw me make something of myself, that he died still struggling on that hard Scrabble farm." Everett looked at her, and she saw understanding in his eyes. "But I try to honor him by living the kind of life he dreamed about, by being the kind of man he raised me to be. That is all we can do for the ones we have lost. Live in a way that makes their sacrifices mean something." The words settled into Zelda's chest, and she felt something shift inside her like ice beginning to crack after a long winter. "You make it sound possible." "It is possible," Everett said. "And I will help you prove it." They reached the outskirts of San Jose as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Everett found a sheltered spot behind a livery stable where they could watch the boarding house without being easily seen. As Zelda had predicted, two of Thornton's men loitered on the street corner opposite her boarding house, trying and failing to look casual. "We need a distraction," Zelda murmured. Everett nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the street. Then a grin tugged at his mouth. "How do you feel about causing a minor stampede?" 20 minutes later, Everett paid a young boy 2 bits to spook a farmer's wagon team at precisely the right moment. The horses bolted down the street directly toward where Thornton's men stood, forcing them to scramble out of the way. In the confusion that followed, with the farmer cursing and bystanders shouting, and the horses careening toward the town square, Zelda slipped through the boarding house's back entrance. Her room was on the 2nd floor, a cramped space that smelled of old wood and loneliness. The trunk containing her father's papers sat at the foot of the narrow bed, and she knelt beside it with hands that shook only slightly. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture, were the ledgers that represented her father's entire adult life, every careful notation a testament to his integrity. Zelda gathered them quickly, stuffing the ledgers into a canvas bag. As she stood, a floorboard creaked behind her. She spun to find Marcus Thornton himself standing in her doorway, his expensive suit and oiled hair at odds with the cold cruelty in his eyes. "Miss Newton," he said pleasantly, "I had hoped to catch you here." Zelda's hand moved toward the small knife she kept in her pocket, but Thornton was faster, producing a derringer that looked almost delicate in his manicured hand. "I would not recommend that. This gun may be small, but at this distance, it will make quite a mess." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "You have been a tremendous inconvenience, my dear. I had hoped the loss of your ranch would encourage you to leave San Jose quietly, but you seem determined to cause trouble." "You stole my father's land with forged documents," Zelda said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Did you think I would simply accept that? I thought you would be realistic about your chances of proving anything." Thornton's smile did not reach his eyes. "Who would believe a penniless girl over a respected banker? But then you had to make that scene in the street, had to threaten to expose me. And now you have involved that cowboy, which complicates matters considerably. Everett has nothing to do with this. On the contrary, he made himself part of this when he interfered with my men yesterday. I have made inquiries about Mr. Sutton. Former cavalry scout, honorable discharge, keeps to himself, but has a reputation for being good in a fight." Thornton's expression hardened. "He will not save you this time, Miss Newton. My men are watching this building from every angle. When you leave here, you will come with me quietly, or I will ensure Mr. Sutton has an unfortunate accident within the week." Zelda's mind raced. The ledgers in her bag represented proof of Thornton's crimes, but they would do no good if she was dead. And she could not bear the thought of Everett being hurt because of her, this man who had shown her kindness when she had forgotten such things existed. "What do you want?" she asked. "Your silence, permanently. I have an associate who runs a, shall we say, specialized establishment in San Francisco. He is always looking for new girls, and he pays well for ones who are young and pretty and have nowhere else to turn." Thornton's smile made her skin crawl. "You will go with him tonight, and you will never speak of this again. In return, I will leave your cowboy friend in peace." Rage flooded through Zelda, burning away the emptiness that had filled her for so long. This man had stolen her father's legacy, and now he wanted to steal her life, her freedom, her very self. And he thought she would submit quietly to save a man she had known for barely a day, except Everett was not just any man. He was someone who saw worth in her when she could see none in herself, who risked his life for a stranger because it was the right thing to do, who made her feel alive again when she had been certain she would never feel anything but grief. No, Zelda said clearly. Thornton's eyebrows rose. "I beg your pardon," I said. "No, I will not go quietly. I will not disappear. I will not let you win." Zelda clutched the bag of ledgers tighter. "You can shoot me, but these ledgers will survive. Everett knows about them. He will make sure they reach Judge Harrington. Then I will kill him too." Thornton raised the derringer. "And anyone else who gets in my way." The window shattered inward, and Everett came through it in an explosion of glass and fury. He tackled Thornton before the banker could turn, sending the derringer skittering across the floor. The two men crashed into the wall, and Zelda scrambled for the gun, her fingers closing around the pearl handle. "Zelda, run!" Everett shouted, blocking a wild punch from Thornton. But Zelda did not run. She pointed the derringer at Thornton's head with steady hands and said, "Stop, or I will shoot you myself." Both men froze. Thornton's face was red with rage and exertion, but he read something in Zelda's eyes that made him go very still. "She is not bluffing," Everett said quietly, blood trickling from his lip where Thornton had landed a lucky blow. "I know that look. She will pull that trigger." "You would hang for murder," Thornton spat. "Perhaps," Zelda acknowledged. "But you will still be dead, and these ledgers will still prove your fraud. So I suggest you come with us very quietly to see the sheriff. We will let the law decide your fate." The commotion had drawn attention. Footsteps thundered on the stairs, and the boarding house landlady appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide. Behind her, a crowd was gathering, drawn by the sound of breaking glass and raised voices. Among them, Zelda spotted several prominent San Jose citizens, including the owner of the newspaper and the mayor himself. "What is the meaning of this?" the mayor demanded. Everett, still holding Thornton in a firm grip, looked at Zelda. She understood what he was offering her, the chance to speak, to be heard, to make her case before witnesses who could not ignore what happened in broad daylight with so many eyes watching. Zelda raised her voice, letting it carry to the crowd. "Marcus Thornton stole my father's ranch using forged loan documents. I have my father's original ledgers here that prove the debts Thornton claimed were falsified. When I threatened to expose him, he sent armed men to kill me. Today, he attempted to force me into prostitution to ensure my silence." She looked directly at the mayor. "I am ready to present my evidence to Judge Harrington when he arrives, and I am prepared to swear out a complaint against Mr. Thornton for fraud, attempted murder, and attempted kidnapping." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. The mayor's face cycled through several expressions before settling on stern determination. "Sheriff Carson, I believe you need to take Mr. Thornton into custody until Judge Harrington can review these allegations." The sheriff, a portly man who had always been deferential to Thornton, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, but with so many witnesses, he had no choice. He stepped forward reluctantly. "Marcus Thornton, you are under arrest pending investigation." Thornton's veneer of civility cracked completely. "This is outrageous. I am the most respected banker in this town. You cannot treat me like a common criminal based on the hysterical accusations of a delusional girl." "The girl seems perfectly rational to me," the newspaper editor said, his eyes gleaming with interest. "And I would very much like to examine those ledgers, Miss Newton, if you are willing to share them." Zelda handed over the derringer to the sheriff and clutched her bag of ledgers protectively. "You may examine them after Judge Harrington has reviewed them, sir. I will not risk them being lost or destroyed before the law has seen them." "A wise precaution," the editor agreed. "I will send a wire to ensure Judge Harrington knows there is an urgent matter awaiting his attention in San Jose." In the chaos that followed, as the sheriff led a protesting Thornton away, and the crowd buzzed with scandal and speculation, Everett took Zelda's elbow gently and guided her through the press of bodies. No one tried to stop them. If anything, people stepped aside respectfully, and Zelda heard whispered words of support and approval. They made it back to Everett's ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossibly beautiful. Zelda felt wrung out, exhausted in body and spirit, but something vital had awakened inside her. The emptiness was gone, replaced by a fierce determination and something else, something that had to do with the man riding beside her who had crashed through a window to save her life. At the ranch, Everett tended his horses while Zelda prepared a simple supper from the supplies in his pantry. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease, as if they had been doing this dance for years instead of hours. When they finally sat down to eat, the silence between them was comfortable, companionable. "Thank you," Zelda said finally, "for everything, for saving my life not once but twice, for believing me, for helping me find my courage again." Everett set down his fork and looked at her with those clear blue eyes. "You had courage all along, Zelda. You just needed someone to remind you it was there." "I thought I had nothing left worth fighting for," she said softly. "But today, when Thornton threatened you, I realized I did have something new and fragile but real." "What is that?" Zelda took a breath, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. "Hope, and maybe the beginning of something more if you feel it too." Everett reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "I have felt it since the moment I saw you standing there, refusing to run from those guns. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen, and the most beautiful, and I knew I would do anything to keep you safe." "That is a dangerous thing to say," Zelda said, but she was smiling. "I seem to attract considerable trouble. Then I suppose it is fortunate I am good in a fight." Everett's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "Stay here, Zelda. Not just tonight, but for as long as you need. Let me help you see this through. And after, when you have your ranch back and justice is served, if you want to leave, I will understand. But if you want to stay—" "Yes," Zelda interrupted, squeezing his hand. "Yes, I want to stay. I want to see where this leads, whatever this is between us." "Then we will face whatever comes together," Everett said, and he raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a gentleness that made her breath catch. The next 3 days passed in a strange bubble of suspended time. Zelda stayed at Everett's ranch, helping with the daily work of caring for the animals and maintaining the property. She had grown up on a ranch, and the familiar rhythms of the work soothed something deep inside her. More than that, she relished the simple joy of working alongside Everett, learning the easy efficiency of his movements and the quiet humor that emerged when he was relaxed. They talked for hours in the evenings, sitting on his porch and watching the stars emerge over the California foothills. Everett told her about his time as a scout, the beautiful and terrible things he had seen in Arizona territory, the Apache warriors he had fought against, and the ones he had learned to respect. He spoke of his dream to build something lasting here in this valley, to raise horses and cattle and perhaps, someday, a family. Zelda shared her own dreams, the ones she had buried when her father died. She had wanted to expand the ranch, to improve the breeding stock and experiment with new strains of wheat in the valley soil. She had imagined building a life that honored her father's legacy while pushing it forward into the future. She had thought those dreams were dead, but speaking them aloud to Everett made them feel possible again. On the second night, as they sat close together on the porch steps, Everett put his arm around her shoulders, and Zelda leaned into his warmth. The intimacy felt natural, right in a way she had never experienced before. When she turned her face up to his, Everett cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing over the healing graze from Thornton's bullet. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, "and so strong. I am in awe of you, Zelda Newton." "Kiss me," she whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. Everett smiled and bent his head, capturing her lips in a kiss that was tender and searching and full of promise. Zelda's hands came up to grip his shoulders, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, all the hope and fear and desperate longing for connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Everett rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it is too soon, and we have only known each other a few days, but it is the truth." Zelda's eyes burned with tears, but they were good tears, cleansing tears. "It does not feel too soon. It feels like I have been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it. I am falling in love with you too, Everett." They kissed again, deeper this time, and Zelda felt the last walls around her heart crumble. This was what it felt like to be alive again, to want something beyond mere survival, to believe in a future that held joy as well as pain. Judge Harrington arrived in San Jose on the third day, a stern-faced man in his 60s with a reputation for ruthless fairness. Everett and Zelda rode into town together, and this time, no one tried to stop them. The streets buzzed with gossip about Thornton's arrest, and Zelda saw curiosity and sympathy in the faces that turned toward her, a stark contrast to the pity she had endured before. The hearing was held in the town's largest meeting hall, packed with spectators eager to witness the downfall of a man who had wielded power so carelessly. Zelda presented her father's ledgers, walking Judge Harrington through each entry with a clarity born of desperation and determination. The judge examined the documents with meticulous care, comparing them to the papers Thornton had submitted to claim the Newton ranch. "These are clearly fraudulent," Judge Harrington said finally, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "The handwriting does not match, the dates are inconsistent, and the amounts claimed are wildly inflated compared to the actual loans documented in Mr. Newton's ledgers." He turned his stern gaze on Thornton, who sat between two deputies, his expensive suit rumpled and his face haggard. "Marcus Thornton, I find clear evidence of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. Furthermore, Miss Newton's testimony regarding your threats and attempts to coerce her are supported by multiple witnesses. I am remanding you to custody to await trial for these crimes." The hall erupted in noise, some shouting approval, others protesting, but Judge Harrington's gavel silenced them. "Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate return of the Newton Ranch to its rightful owner, Miss Zelda Newton, along with restitution for the months of lost income and emotional distress she has suffered. The bank's assets will be frozen pending a full audit to determine if other citizens have been similarly defrauded." Zelda felt Everett's hand find hers under the table, squeezing tight. She squeezed back, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After months of grief and helplessness, justice had finally been served. Her father's legacy was restored. As they left the hall, several townspeople approached to offer congratulations and apologies for not standing with her sooner. Zelda accepted them with grace, understanding that fear made people silent, but that silence did not have to be permanent. The newspaper editor asked for a full interview, wanting to document the case thoroughly to prevent similar frauds in the future. The mayor promised that the town council would implement new oversight procedures for the bank, but the person Zelda most wanted to talk to was Everett, who had stepped aside to let her have her moment of triumph, but whose steady presence had made it all possible. She found him outside, leaning against the hitching post with a soft smile on his face. "How does it feel?" he asked, overwhelming, wonderful, terrifying. Zelda laughed shakily. I have my ranch back, Everett, 3,000 acres and a house full of memories. I should be ecstatic. But, he prompted gently, but when I think about going back there, living in that house alone, working that land by myself. She trailed off, searching his face. It does not feel like coming home, not anymore. Everett straightened, his expression suddenly intent. What would feel like home? Zelda stepped closer, close enough to feel his warmth, to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. You, she said simply. These past few days at your ranch, working beside you, talking with you, falling asleep under your roof and waking to your smile, that felt like home. Zelda. His voice was rough with emotion. I know it is fast, probably foolish, definitely scandalous. The words tumbled out in a rush. But I have learned that life is too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending I do not know my own heart. I love you, Everett Sutton. I want to build a life with you. And I want to know if you would consider merging your ranch with mine, combining our dreams into something we can create together. Everett pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering. I would consider it the greatest honor of my life, he said into her hair. I love you, Zelda. I want to marry you, build a home with you, raise horses and children and crops and anything else we can dream up together. Then ask me, she whispered. Everett pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his hands cradling her face. Zelda Newton, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are worth fighting for, worth living for, worth everything? Yes, Zelda said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her there on the streets of San Jose while people whistled and applauded, and Zelda did not care who saw or what they thought. She had been dead inside, hollowed out by loss and injustice, and this man had breathed life back into her. Together, they were stronger than they could ever be alone. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on the Newton Ranch under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Everett had spent those weeks working tirelessly to restore the property, repairing fences and buildings that had been neglected since Thornton took possession. Zelda had thrown herself into the work alongside him, reclaiming each acre as an act of love and defiance. They had combined Everett's small herd with the cattle she purchased with part of the restitution money, and the valley rang again with the sounds of livestock and industry. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, presided over by a circuit preacher, and attended by many of the townspeople who had found their courage in the wake of Thornton's exposure. Several other victims of the banker's schemes had come forward, and the town was in the process of healing its wounds and rebuilding its integrity. Zelda wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her by the local seamstress, and carried wildflowers gathered from the ranch's meadows. When Everett saw her walking toward him across the grass, his eyes filled with tears. "You are radiant," he said when she reached him, his voice thick with emotion. "You are everything I never knew I needed," Zelda replied, taking his hands in hers. The vows they spoke were traditional, but Zelda felt the weight and wonder of each word. To love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as they both lived. These were promises she could make with her whole heart, knowing that the man beside her had already proven his worth beyond doubt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Everett kissed her with such tenderness that Zelda felt her soul settle into place, finally home after a long and painful journey. The celebration lasted into the evening, with food and music and dancing under strings of lanterns. Zelda danced with her new husband, their bodies moving together with the same easy synchronicity they had found in work and conversation and love. She felt eyes on them, but they were kind eyes now, approving eyes, and she realized she had become part of the community again instead of its outcast. As the stars emerged and the guests began to drift away, Everett took Zelda's hand and led her toward the house, the one her father had built with his own hands. They had spent the past weeks making it theirs, blending Everett's sparse possessions with Zelda's cherished mementos, creating spaces that belonged to their combined future rather than her painful past. On the threshold, Everett swept her into his arms, carrying her across in the traditional gesture. Zelda laughed, her arms around his neck, and felt joy bubble up inside her like a spring after long drought. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sutton," Everett said, setting her down gently in the front room. "Welcome home, Mr. Sutton," Zelda replied, and drew him into a kiss that promised all the passion and partnership their marriage would hold. That night, in the quiet darkness of the bedroom that had once been hers alone, Zelda lay in her husband's arms and marveled at how completely her life had transformed. She had gone from believing she had nothing left worth fighting for to discovering that she was worth everything, that love and hope and justice were still possible in a world that had seemed determined to crush her spirit. "What are you thinking?" Everett murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I am thinking about how close I came to giving up," Zelda said honestly. "If you had not ridden into that alley when you did, I would be dead now. I had accepted it, welcomed it even." Everett tightened his arms around her. "But I did ride into that alley, and you did not give up. You fought back harder than anyone I have ever known. Because you showed me I had something to fight for. You saw worth in me when I could see none in myself." She turned in his embrace to face him, seeing his features in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You gave me back my life, Everett. You gave meaning to mine," he countered. "I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions of building a ranch but without any real purpose behind it. Now every fence I mend and every horse I train is for us, for the future we are creating together. You made me want to dream again." They made love then with a tenderness that brought tears to Zelda's eyes, and afterward she lay in perfect contentment, listening to Everett's heartbeat slow as he drifted toward sleep. This was what it meant to be home, she thought. Not a place but a person. Not walls and land but arms that held you safe and a heart that beat in rhythm with yours. The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching in California during the late 1870s and early 1880s required constant adaptation to changing markets and weather patterns. But Zelda and Everett faced each obstacle together, their partnership growing stronger with each trial overcome. They modernized the ranch operations, introducing new techniques Everett had learned from other ranchers and innovations Zelda devised through careful observation and experimentation. In the spring of 1880, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror, memories of her mother dying in childbirth surfacing with visceral force. But Everett held her through her fears, accompanying her to every appointment with the midwife and reading everything he could find about maternal health. "You are strong," he told her again and again, "and I will be with you every step of the way." Their first child, a son they named Daniel James Sutton, arrived in January of 1881 during a rare California snowfall that blanketed the valley in white. The birth was long and difficult, but both mother and baby survived, and when Everett placed their son in Zelda's arms for the first time, she wept with gratitude and wonder. "He looks like your father," Everett observed, touching the baby's downy head with reverent fingers. Zelda studied her son's tiny face and saw it was true. Daniel had the same determined jaw and broad forehead that had characterized her father. "Papa would have loved him so much," she whispered. "He would have been proud of you too," Everett said. Look at everything you have built, everything you have overcome. You honored his legacy by fighting for it and making it flourish. Over the following years, the Sutton Ranch became one of the most prosperous in the San Jose area. Zelda's careful management and Everett's skill with horses created a reputation for quality that drew buyers from as far as San Francisco. They hired several hands to help with the expanding operation, treating them fairly and earning loyalty that transcended mere employment. In 1883, they welcomed a daughter they named Margaret Rose, and 2 years later, another son they called Thomas Everett. The house rang with the sounds of children's laughter, and Zelda often paused in her work to marvel at the life she had built from the ashes of despair. Marcus Thornton had been sentenced to 15 years in San Quentin prison for his crimes, and the audit of his bank had uncovered dozens of other fraudulent transactions. Many families had recovered stolen property or received restitution, and the scandal had led to new banking regulations throughout California. Zelda took some satisfaction in knowing that her refusal to surrender had protected others, even if it could not undo all the harm Thornton had caused. As the years turned into decades, Everett's hair silvered at the temples and Zelda found laugh lines bracketing her eyes, testaments to a life well lived. Their children grew strong and capable, learning the ranching trade from parents who worked side by side as true partners. Daniel proved to have his grandfather's head for numbers and management, while Margaret inherited her mother's innovative spirit, and Thomas displayed his father's gift with horses. On a warm evening in the autumn of 1895, Zelda and Everett sat on the porch they had rebuilt and expanded over the years, watching the sun set over land that had been fought for and earned and cherished. Their children were grown now, Daniel managing much of the ranch's daily operations while Margaret and Thomas pursued their own interests within the family business. "You ever think about that day in the alley?" Zelda asked, her hand finding Everett's with the automatic ease of decades together. "When you rode in and changed everything?" Everett smiled, the expression carving deeper grooves in his weathered face. "I think about it every time I look at you and realize how close I came to riding past, to minding my own business and letting fate take its course. What made you stop? What made you interfere?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I saw a woman standing tall in the face of evil, refusing to cower even when she had every right to be terrified. And I thought about all the times I had walked away from injustice because it was safer or easier, and I knew I could not do it again. Not that day, not for you." He squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made. Mine was trusting you when you told me I was worth fighting for," Zelda said. "I had convinced myself there was nothing left, that I was better off dead than continuing to exist in such pain. But you showed me I was wrong. You showed me that life could be beautiful again, that love was possible, that hope was not just a cruel illusion." Everett turned to face her fully, his blue eyes still clear and bright despite his years. "You saved me too, you know. I was just going through the motions before I met you, existing without truly living. You gave me purpose and passion and a reason to build something meaningful. You made me whole." They sat in comfortable silence, as the sky deepened from gold to purple to the velvet blue of twilight. Around them, the ranch hummed with life, the cattle lowing softly, horses nickering in the pastures, and somewhere inside the house, they could hear their granddaughter practicing piano, the notes spilling out through open windows. "We built something good," Zelda said softly. "We built something extraordinary," Everett corrected. "Against all odds, despite every obstacle thrown in our path, we created a life worth living and a legacy worth leaving. And we did it together." As the first stars began to emerge overhead, Zelda leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and felt profound gratitude for the cowboy who had shown her she was worth everything. The girl who had stood in that alley waiting for death seemed like someone from another lifetime, and in a way, she was. That Zelda had died, and from her ashes, this woman had been born, a woman who knew her own strength and worth, who understood that love was the greatest act of courage, and who had learned that even in the darkest moments, hope could break through like wildflowers after rain. The decades continued to roll forward, bringing new challenges and new joys. The turn of the century saw the ranch adapting to changing times, incorporating new technologies while maintaining the core values of hard work and integrity that Zelda and Everett had established. Their children and grandchildren carried forward the family legacy, each adding their own innovations and passions to the enterprise. Everett lived to see his 80th year, still rising each morning to walk the land he loved, still reaching for Zelda's hand across the breakfast table, still looking at her with eyes full of wonder and devotion. When he passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1921, Zelda grieved deeply, but without the hollow despair that had consumed her in her youth. She had been blessed with 4 decades of profound partnership, and she carried that love inside her like a flame that could never be extinguished. She lived another 7 years, watching her grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. And when her time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by family in the house her father had built and she had filled with love. On her gravestone, placed beside Everett's in the family plot overlooking the valley they had cherished, their children inscribed words that captured the essence of their story. She thought there was nothing left worth fighting for, until he showed her she was worth everything. And in the years that followed, as new generations worked the land and built their own lives on the foundation Zelda and Everett had laid, the story of the cowboy and the woman he saved became family legend, told and retold as a reminder that love could transform despair into hope, that one act of courage could change everything, and that the greatest legacy was not land or wealth but the choice to see worth in others and fight for what truly mattered. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding and adapting through the 20th century and beyond, but at its heart remained the spirit of 2 people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built something luminous together. Their love story became part of the land itself, woven into every fence post and pasture, every sunrise and sunset, a testament to the transformative power of choosing love over surrender, hope over despair, and fighting for what was worth everything.